What is going on, Nuggets Nation, NBA fans? My name is Tom Leuthner. Welcome back into Nuggets Today, presented by Fan Arch. We do have a few topics to cover. Same as last episode, I am going to break down the bench. I know that the scenery is different behind me. It's because I am getting ready to leave the country, so I am traveling a little bit right now before the flight. So I wanted to try to get as many episodes as I can out to you guys before I do leave, strictly because I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get any out while I'm over there, but I want to hop right into this. And this is the same topic. I'm moving higher up in the bench, and I want to give you guys what I think my predictions would be for these kinds of players for Denver this year. Obviously, like I said, these guys are going to get more playing time than the four guys I covered last episode. So I want to hop right into it. The last guy I covered was Deron Holmes. Now we're hopping into Peyton Watson and what I think Peyton Watson will do this upcoming year. Now, I think that he'll be playing more of a three rather than a four than he did last year. But I think when it comes to this season, when you see points per game, I would probably say P. Watt's going to be around 7 and 9 points per game. Rebounds, maybe 3 to 4. Assists is going to be low, obviously, 1 to maybe 1.5. I do think that we see Peyton Watson up there with the blocks. Like, same thing I said with Deron Holmes. I think he's going to be averaging 1 block, especially if he's playing, the small forward rather than the power forward. I think we might see him on guys who are smaller than him, which is great because then you get a guy who is able to play. He's a lengthy three, if he's able to play that. Maybe even depending on the lineup they run, maybe you run him at the 2 strictly for defensive purposes. I do think that my original prediction was that he wasn't shooting that well from the three-point line, but because of all of his work that he's putting in this offseason, I think that he shoots pretty well. Like I said, league average was 36 last year. I think we see Peyton Watson around there. Last year he didn't shoot as well, or he didn't shoot that well at least. I do think that we see him around that 36% mark now. I think that, again, the work that he's putting in, supposedly he lost a hitch in his shot. I think he's going to get more of an opportunity offensively, but I also think he might be fighting for a little bit of minutes off the bench. When it comes to minutes, I do think that we see him as one of the guys who comes off the bench, gets a majority of the minutes, at least to start the season, because he is trusted. And then I think that we see a little bit of a competition for whoever's playing the 2 and the rest of the players playing the 3, and one of those guys playing the 2 is obviously somebody who I am so high on and I really hope does well, and that is Julian Strawther. Now, Strawther's a great player. I think that offensively he's a super spark plug off Denver's bench. He was able to show that in the playoffs a little bit. Like I said, I think that the competition for minutes with him is going to be a little tougher because you have a guy who the next 2 guys I cover are going to be in competition with Julian Strawther, and that's Bruce and Timmy, and I'll get to them in a second. When you look back at last season, obviously his role was a little bit smaller, but there was less competition, so he was averaging 9 points per game, 2 rebounds, 1 assist. I think this upcoming season, if he's able to step up and get a more advanced role than what he's had, I think we see 11 to 13 points, maybe 2 to 3 rebounds, and maybe 2 assists a game. And I know it's a lot, hoping for a lot from Julian Strawther, but I really do think that we see maybe 2 threes a game out of him, which advances his stats right there to at least 6 points a game. If we do see him play that backup ball handler role, which is something I've covered that Rachel Strand and I had talked about, then maybe we see him score at the basket more. Maybe we see him be more of a shot creator and come in and take 7, 8 shots a game, 9 shots a game. Maybe we see him get some minutes with the starting role or the starting lineup, and that lineup goes out and they put up they give him 4 shots in the corner in the game, or they're able to let him be that spark plug in the game. So I think that he could really get an advanced role and be that good of a player. Somebody that I've seen him sort of be compared to is a Golden State Warriors Jordan Poole when Poole was over on that roster. And I think that's a great comparison. I think that Strawther could be a guy who is going to be able to make his own shots, be a little bit of a playmaker, but also be able to hit the three-point ball pretty efficiently. I would like to see his defense stepped up some more. That is something I've covered in the past, but I would love to also see his role expanded if he is able to win out a better spot in the rotation. Now, one of the guys that he's going to be competing with is obviously no other than one of my favorite players in recent Denver history, and that is Bruce Brown. Now, Bruce Brown has missed some time the last couple of years, and I don't know if it's necessarily because of injury or if he just is generally didn't care as much because he wasn't on a playoff team. He obviously came back to Denver on the contract he came back on because he wanted to compete rather than anything else. If he wanted to be on a team where he was going to play, he could have stayed in the Eastern Conference, stayed with gone back to Toronto. He could have done multiple things. He could have stayed with the Pelicans. He could have gone back to Toronto. He could have been a guy who was playing legitimate minutes on a team that doesn't make sense for him to play on. He wanted to come back to a competitor. He did, and he came back to Denver, which is a place where the fan base loved him. I loved him as a player. But when it comes to his stat line, I think this role, I think we see him at the point guard position. That's something I've said with Jalen Pickett. I think right now he's the primary ball handler off the bench. So I think that leads to maybe 8 to 10 points a game. I think that I'd probably say he's closer to the 8-point mark, probably 4 rebounds. And then I want to say anywhere from 2 to 4 assists. If we see him play the point guard role more, maybe you see 8 and 4 or 5 out of Bruce Brown and maybe a steal per game, shoots semi-efficiently. He was a pretty good shooter with Denver his first stint here, so I would love to see him maintain that shooting ability. But I do think that he's going to be playing with the bench unit more, which means that it's going to be less open looks for him like it is if he was playing with Jokic, but more of him facilitating. I do think that Val's a good passer, and I'll cover Val next episode, but I do think that's the stat line we see from Bruce Brown. Obviously, he is going to be fantastic defensively for Denver, especially off the bench, and I think it's going to be interesting seeing him in that point guard role, realistically, because when we saw him last time on Denver, he was maybe a 1 defensively, but he was playing the 2 to 4, and it was great to see him do that. So I'm interested to see, and I'm intrigued to see what that point guard role holds for him. But like I said, I think you're going to see around 8-3 and I would love to see 8-3 and 4 or 5, or 8-3 and 5 specifically. But the next guy that's also fighting for those minutes with Julian Strawther is somebody who I think is going to be one of the biggest impact pieces for Denver off the bench, and that is Julian Strawther. Now, Tim Hardway Jr., sorry. And I think that my projected stats for him, probably around 10 to 12 points a game, 2 to 3 rebounds, 1 or 2 assists. He's going to be there. He's going to shoot, be on Denver to shoot the 3 ball. And I think that we see him shoot super efficient. I think that maybe we see him push the 40% mark from the 3-point line. I think that's exactly what Denver needs, especially off their bench. And I would love to see Strawther be able to, Tim Hardaway be able to do that, because he's a fantastic shooter, but he could also finish at the rim. So I think that's why I'm saying maybe we see 12 points from him. Maybe we see more than that if Denver gives him an expanded role. Maybe we see Tim Hardaway come off the bench and put up 15 points a game and is Denver's number 1 player off the bench and becomes that 6-man. Ryan Blackburn actually, at the time of this recording, put out a poll on Twitter saying or asking who does he think the 6-man for Denver would be between Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway, or somebody else. And in my opinion, it's Tim Hardaway. He's the best scorer on the bench for Denver right now. I think that he's a proven vet, not to say Bruce isn't, but you look at the Pistons and what he was able to do with the Pistons this year, and he was starting for the Pistons at times. So I think that Tim is going to be one of the best acquisitions for Denver this offseason. I would think that if you put all 4 of those guys together, realistically, if they're all around 8 to 10 points per game, you might be seeing a 30, 40-point bench, which is something Denver hasn't seen in a very long time. So I'm super excited for this unit. I will get to the next 4 players in tomorrow's episode. So that's all I got for you guys today. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you guys want me to cover anything, please throw it down below, and I will see you guys next episode.